Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Suni Gray and this is from the South, the evening news brief from Tell Us Your English. We start this new edition right now. Chileans will be going back to the polls on December 17th after no candidate won an absolute majority in Sunday's first round of the presidential election. As expected, the former president, Sebastián Piñera, representing the right, led the ballot, but the candidates of the left and center-left did better than expected. More details in the next report.
Election day ended in Chile with a total turnout of 46%. With over 90% of the votes counted, Sebastián Piñera and Alejandro Guiller will face each other in the second round. Even though the right-wing candidate came first with 37% of the votes, he was far from reaching the results predicted by opinion polls.
In 4 more weeks, us Chileans will have to choose between change and continuity, between unity and division, between dialogue or digging up the past, between the future and the past, between progress and stagnation.
At the campaign headquarters of Alejandro Guiller, supporters of the center-left government candidates celebrated his success in reaching the second round. Several of President Michelle Bachelet's ministers joined in thanking the other candidates for their backing in the runoff.
I want to say a very special thanks to Carolina Goik, who called me a few minutes ago to express her satisfaction with our triumph, and also my particular affection and thanks after our long working relationship for the call I got from Beatriz Sanchez, a woman of great bravery who has done a great job.
The big surprise in the elections were the results for the left-wing Frente Amplio, with Beatriz Sanchez taking over 20%. The party also increased its number of seats in parliament to 20, plus 1 senator.
I want to send a message, a very clear message, to all the polls that said that we were going to be weighed down. Where is the oracle that is the CEP pollster now, which tried to erase us from the map?
Not everything was celebration. The new composition of the Congress leaves the Christian democracy in a minority. The party will discuss this Monday whether to support Alejandro Guiller in the next round. On the other hand, the right-wing coalition Chile Vamos got a high vote in both houses, while the new faces of the Broad Front have emerged as the third force in parliament. But who supports who in the second round has yet to be confirmed.
If you take a look at the agendas of Alejandro Guiller, of Beatriz Sanchez, of Carolina Goik, and Meo, there's a big convergence. For example, I can list diversifying exports, decentralization, pensions, health, and free education.
With a month to go before the second round, both candidates say they will start working immediately. Time is short and the support of other parties is not yet clear. The polls already show it will be a tight race for the presidency on December 17th.
Thousands of people demonstrated outside the U.S. Congress on Sunday to demand better treatment for Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria devastated the island. The protesters demanded the cancellation of Puerto Rico's $73 billion debt and the repeal of the Jones Act, which limits foreign ships carrying aid to the colonial territory. Among the speakers were members of Congress, celebrities, and activists.
We are not demanding handouts. We're demanding justice. When we ask for them to eliminate the Jones Act, we are demanding justice. When we demand that they cancel the debt of Puerto Rico, we are demanding justice. When we demand for them to rebuild Puerto Rico, we are demanding justice.
Earlier, we spoke with our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, to find out exactly what the demonstrators of the Puerto Rico March were demanding. Let's hear what he said.
They say, we basically demand to be treated exactly as U.S. citizens as we are, as the rest of the country, and they do believe that today, 2 months after the pass of the Hurricane Maria, About 50% of the island is still without power, without electricity, and thousands of people without water, something that they understand that is absolutely it's impossible to accept, impossible to justify a country that is supposed to be the richest country in the world, to treat them with the same importance and at the same speed as they're working on the relief of other parts of the country, as California, as Texas, and as Florida.
Puerto Rican independence leader Oscar Lopez Rivera gave an exclusive interview to Telesur on his first visit to Cuba since his release from a U.S. prison.
Para mí, la lucha por la independencia de Puerto Rico es una lucha.
For me, the fight for the independence of Puerto Rico is an obligation because I love my country, I love my people. So I decided to fight for a noble cause and fight for justice. It didn't matter what I had to go through or what the government did to me or the conditions of the cell I was locked in. I knew I was serving my country. I know I was fighting for independence. At the end, it didn't feel like I was making a sacrifice for my country. It was my obligation as a citizen.
Violence erupted in Haiti as the president's move to reinstate the army after 22 years triggered huge protests. Hundreds of protesters took over the streets of Port-au-Prince, enraged over the controversial return of the army after 2 decades. The protesters threw rocks at police, barricaded roads by burning tires and attacking several vehicles. The police fired shots in the air and threw tear gas at the demonstrators to control the crowd. And we have more news in a minute, so stay with us. Chile is not the only Latin American country in electoral mode. In Honduras, presidential candidates have held their closing rallies ahead of next Sunday's elections. The streets of Tegucigalpa were flooded by supporters of the opposition candidates on the last day of campaigning for the presidential and parliamentary elections. Recent opinion polls have put President Hernandez of the Conservative National Party, who's seeking a controversial second term, ahead of other candidates. Our correspondent Gilda Silvestrucci has more from Tegucigalpa.
This morning, the distribution of the electoral packages to the occidental and northern area of the country began. Schools and electoral colleges have already been assigned military forces to guard the ballot boxes. The presidential candidates held massive events for the final day of their campaigns. Starting tomorrow, candidates will only be able to use media outlets to talk about their campaign proposals. Today is the last political public event, and it would be held by the representative of the Leftist Alliance of Opposition against the dictatorship, Salvador Naricila. This is the news update on the ground about the electoral process in Honduras.
Gilda Silvestrucci with that report. Thousands of Mexicans left homeless by September's earthquakes have been marching through the capital. They want more effective aid from the government. Details in the next report.
The victims from the September 19th earthquake marched throughout the streets of Mexico City. Thousands of families who were left homeless after the earthquake and are still living in temporary shelters, they have decided to keep protesting until their concerns are heard by the government.
Until our houses are reconstructed, until we get a decent home, we will remain here, protesting and closing streets.
The government, along with financial institutions, are proposing to those who lost their homes that they can rebuild their homes by getting a 30-year credit, a proposal considered unfair by the owners of the damaged homes.
They are a mockery from the Mexican people. They think we live with huge salaries and we don't. People don't have money to pay for those greedy credits.
A fundamental request is for the funds of the Natural Damages Trust Fund to be made public, and especially the international donations that the country received.
This situation is a disgrace for us, but there's also other people who helped us. With that support from the world, we have enough for reconstruction.
We won't allow this. Reconstruction can't happen through banks. It should be through people and organized people.
It's estimated that the September earthquakes left over 200,000 people without homes throughout the country, a national emergency that experts say it will take years to be solved. The calculation for the total reconstruction is over $2.5 billion. Nevertheless, the National Congress approved its 2018 budget only $125 million for the reconstruction.
3 hours of non-stop rain have flooded the streets of the Colombian tourist city of Cartagena. Local authorities said that the historic areas of the city were most affected, with water rising to 50 centimeters. People shared photos and videos on social media that showed the heavily flooded roads, with people pushing cars stuck in several streets and others being pushed on carts to get through water. The intense rains hit the Caribbean city throughout the weekend. And just a few weeks before an anniversary marking the Panama Canal's return to the government, experts have suggested that profits are being channeled solely to large economic powers and the social groups related to them.
Another ship sails into the Panama Canal. Its toll payment will go to the canal's records. It is one of the main income sources in the Central American Strait. Nonetheless, just a small part of the population is getting this money.
This wealthy sector answers only to the powerful social groups in the country, and they won't commit to solve the great social needs.
The interoceanic path generates each year almost $1 billion to the country. Nevertheless, experts state this money is subsidizing big companies and not solving the social inequality.
The income should help the development of our human resources, but they're using this money to pay to transnationals, subsidizing them with the excuse of lowering production costs. Therefore, it's not really useful for the country's needs. It's just solving the crisis of the capitalist system.
The canal's profit, as well as other sources of income, allowed Panama to grow at least 6% more. But it is still one of the poorest countries in the region, with at least 20% of its population living in poverty.
What has happened in Panama since its foundation is that powerful economic groups have used the country's resources to increase their wealth.
Getting back the canal was a major improvement and very important for Panama's sovereignty, but it still needs to be beneficial for everyone.
Thousands of people marched and celebrated in Rio de Janeiro's Gay Pride Parade, packing Copacabana Beach, despite the ultra-conservative mayor's opposition to the event. With Mayor Marcelo Crivella, an evangelical Christian, in office, it was the first time in 22 years that city funds were barred from paying for part of the parade. Crivella is also less than beloved for saying that he would cut back on funding to Rio's Samba schools, the social groups that work year-round to prepare floats for the legendary carnival. Local media estimate that 800,000 people took part in the celebration. And still in Brazil, people have been marching on Black Consciousness Day to remember the enslaved Africans who were brought to the country. Almost 5 million Africans entered the country by 1850. That was 8 times the number of people from Europe who arrived in the same period. Afro-Brazilians marched and played music in their memory and to highlight some of the most pressing issues facing Black Brazilians today. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Limas, has more details.
We are in Sao Paulo, just in front of the Museum of Art, where hundreds of people from social movements are gathering for Black Consciousness Day, a day that was established by the government of former President Lula da Silva in 2003. This to commemorate the life and resistance of Afro-Brazilian leader Zumbi dos Palmares. On this day, social movements are defending all that has been achieved regarding education for the Black community, with scholarship programs that have allowed the community to increase to 30% their representation in universities in 10 years. They are also protesting against the violence that the Black youth from the favelas have to face from the police. In Sao Paulo alone, Black youth are killed 4 times more than from other communities, and in Rio de Janeiro, 9 out of 10 killings by the police affect the black communities living in the outskirts of the city. The black community is defending their own rights today.
Ignacio Limas with that report. Numbers of women and social organizations in Paraguay have protested against the 44 cases of femicides registered in 2017. According to the reports of the Ministry of Women, the rates of gender violence cases and femicides have increased since 2015. Social organizations have arranged a march to commemorate the International Day of Non-Violence Against Women on November 25th.
This year there have been 44 cases of femicide across the country. We want to expose the fact that in about half of these cases, women reported domestic violence to authorities and still ended up being murdered. The judicial system and the public ministry are not working well. They are not protecting or guaranteeing the lives and safety of these women.
We'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making headlines around the world.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is facing her biggest challenge yet, as talks on forming a coalition government have collapsed. The Free Democrats Party withdrew from the talks after more than 4 weeks of fruitless negotiations with Merkel's Conservative bloc and the environmentalist Greens, saying there was not enough common ground. The collapse raises the prospects of new elections.
The path towards a minority government for a stable country, for a country that has so many challenges to deal with, is one that I would have to think about very, very carefully. One should never say never, but I would be very skeptical and think that the new elections would be the better path. I want to say also, though, that the voters gave us a task, and we have never had such a situation. And that is why I have taken special note of the President's words today.
German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has said this is the worst crisis in Germany's 68-year history of post-World War II democracy.
This is the moment where all the parties involved need to stop for a moment and rethink their position. All political parties that have been voted into the German parliament are committed to the public interest. They serve our country. I expect all of them to be ready to talk to try to form a government in the near future.
Kenya's Supreme Court has upheld President Uhuru Kenyatta's victory in October's election rerun, which was boycotted by the opposition party NASA. Supporters of the opposition leader Raila Odinga took to the streets, and several people were injured in sporadic clashes with the police. The Supreme Court dismissed 2 petitions brought before them, therefore validating the October 26 results.
Having carefully considered the above issues, the specific prayers in each petition, as well as the Constitution and the applicable laws, the Court has unanimously determined that the petitions are not merited.
Iraqi Supreme Court has ruled that the Kurdish independence referendum was unconstitutional. The ruling comes nearly 2 months after the vote, in which 92% of Iraqi Kurds supported secession. According to a statement, the Supreme Court also annulled all the consequences and results of the referendum. Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri is confirmed to return to Lebanon for Independence Day celebrations on November 22nd and officially resign from his post. The news comes after al-Hariri's talks with French President Emmanuel Macron on Saturday. This was part of French mediation efforts aimed at trying to ease tensions across the region. At least 3 people have died in India after a 4-story plastics factory collapsed in the northern state of Punjab. Dozens of people are feared to be trapped in the debris. Rescue workers are sifting through the rubble in an attempt to find survivors and bodies. The collapse came hours after fire. The cause of the fire is not yet known.
Lebanon's Hezbollah denies sending weapons to regional conflict zones, including Yemen, Bahrain, Kuwait, or Iraq. Responding to criticisms from ministers of the Arab League meeting convened in Saudi Arabia on Sunday, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah has denied any assistance in the firing of a ballistic missile, which was launched from Riyadh from territory held by Yemeni Houthi rebels. He even refuted any such help either in the past or in the future. And Egypt opened its largely sealed border with Gaza on Saturday after a reconciliation agreement with Hamas gave the Palestinian Authority control over the crossing for the first time since 2007. We have more information in this report.
Egyptian authorities opened the Rafah border crossing on the border with Gaza for 3 consecutive days on Saturday. Humanitarian cases, including patients and students, were allowed to travel on both sides of the Rafah border. Saturday's opening was the first since the Islamic Hamas group handed over control of all the Gaza crossings to the Palestinian Authority.
The closure of the crossings has negatively affected my future. I missed 2 academic years staying at home waiting to travel. I tried to travel every time the crossing opened, but I had been always returned to Gaza. My family lives in Egypt, and the closure of the crossing deprived me of seeing them. I have not seen them for 1 year now.
The Palestinian Authority Crossings and Border Corporation uncovered a new mechanism for running the terminal in a statement. According to the corporation, the Palestinian Authority security employees will take charge of the passengers' movement inside the crossing, while Hamas will arrange the passengers list and maintain security outside the crossing point. Egypt has kept the Rafah crossing largely sealed off since the ouster of Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi from power in 2013. The closure of the crossing has doubled the burdens of dozens of thousands of Palestinians seeking to exit Gaza. Since the beginning of 2017, Egypt opened the Rafah crossings for 15 days only. Hamas and Fatah signed a reconciliation deal under the sponsorship of Egypt, ending a decade of division. Under the agreement, the Palestinian Authority is due to assume control of the Gaza Strip by December.
Thousands of farmers from across India have ended their protests in Delhi, India's capital, against poor agricultural aid to farmers. Anger against the government's apathetic response to rural distress, thousands of farmers protested to press their demands for farm loan waivers and fair crop prices. The protest comes after successive years of low crop prices and no action from the government, leading to a number of farmers' suicides in the past. Zimbabwe's ruling ZANU-PF party has prepared impeachment proceedings against Robert Mugabe, with 230 out of 260 members of parliament voting in favor of the motion in Harare on Monday.
The War Veterans Organization has announced that they will support a court challenge to legalize military action against Mugabe and lead further public protests to put pressure on the 93-year-old leader to step down.
And we have gone to the court today. We are hoping that the case is registered to say that Mugabe, he was derelict of his executive duty, forcing the head of the army to intervene to arrest the criminals. And the army is now done its job. And the people of Zimbabwe on Saturday took off from where the army had left.
Following ZANU-PF's Friday announcement calling for Mugabe's removal as leader of the party and the country, hundreds of thousands of Zimbabweans took to the streets to celebrate his fall. But in an address to the nation on Sunday, alongside military generals, Mugabe announced that he would stay as head of the party, complicating the new plans to ratify the appointment of former Vice President Mnangagwa as the new leader of the country in a special Congress scheduled for December.
I will preside over its processes, which must not be prepossessed by any acts calculated to undermine it or to compromise the outcomes in the eyes of the public.
Zimbabwe now awaits more news on how the impeachment progress will and can progress to remove a leader who has held on to power for 37 years.
Pastoral communities in the arid and semi-arid lands of northern Kenya face the critical challenge of organizing the use of their resources to ensure that each dry season doesn't turn into a drought. That's what happened this year when grass degenerated on their communal lands and the electric fences that blocked migration trails caused a wave of violence.
Since colonial times here in Laikipia, pastoral communities have been seen as barbaric and marginalized in the records of land tenure. They were confined to their land. The main part of these lands was divided in slots, measuring tens of thousands of hectares, which were registered on behalf of wealthy white farmers and of the elite who took power after independence. Pastoral communities still search for peace in Laikipia, their home, surrounded by fences in communities such as Loinek.
They kill our animals. There is no peace here. We don't know what we're going to eat. They want to kill our economy, the livestock on which we must depend.
They have lived here for 30 years without access to schools. They refuse to give out their names, saying that the police criminalizes the entire community in order to kill their livestock, leaving them without any livelihood.
People are living like squatters in this area, especially at Loinek. Most of them are run.
Almost 6,000 of cows and goats of Bokot have been killed by the police. Many families have been left in poverty right now.
Two neighbors take us a few kilometers south, where the police committed one of these massacres.
They have now resorted to charcoal burning and some stealing from other communities right now, of which does not even there before.
Neighbors guarantee that Kirafu, or rhinos, the special vehicles of security forces, came to their land, which is located between two great conservation ranches, and killed an entire family's herd, which ended up as food for wild animals. The reason given by the police, disputed by the community, is that their herd can't leave their land.
You can't step on that place.
The one there is also a school,
of which the Bokot children, the Bokot kids, they were schooling there, but now they are not even going to school.
Their voice has no political representation in Laikipia. Furthermore, the shepherds believe that they are being pushed out of their lands so that they don't have enough numbers for future elections.
And with that report, we've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesiotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesio English, I am Suini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.